Hey, what's up, y'all? It is Nathan from the Three-Handed Bandits, and today we're going to be watching Power Surge, which is our 2025 Power Ranking Series. Today we're going to be breaking down our number 32 ranked Cleveland Browns and what's going to make their season or what's going to break their season. So let's go ahead and get straight into it. So starting off, we're going to be talking about their 2024 season. In order to know where we're going, I think it's very important to contextualize last season and how we got to the position that we're in. So they were 3 and 14 overall and 4 and 13 against the spread. So not only were they losing a lot of games, they were not even keeping them close in a majority of those. The main reason why they struggled so much was their offense, where they ranked 28th in yards per game and 32nd in points per game. It's very hard to be a good NFL team when you're not putting the ball through the uprights or getting it into the end zone. Part of the reason the offense struggled so much was because not only did they have four different quarterbacks start a game, it was four really bad quarterbacks. And in turn, you saw this start to affect their defense. They were 19th in yards allowed per game, but 27th in points per game allowed. So their offense was so bad, it was actually starting to hurt their defense and put them behind the eight ball. PFF actually graded them as a top 10 unit. However, because the offense was constantly leaving them on the field or giving them bad field position to work with, it really in turn hurt the unit as a whole. And so they actually ended last season on a 6 game losing streak where they did not cover the spread in any of those games. So not only were they bad, ended horribly, and it was just crap all around. So now that we talked about that, now we can begin to discuss their offseason. Starting with the offense and what they brought in Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco, spent a third round pick on Dylan Gabriel, a fifth round pick on Shedeur Sanders, second round pick on Quinshon Judkins, a late round pick on Dylan Sampson, and a third round pick on Harold Fannin. They also brought in Deontay Johnson and then Tevin Jenkins and Cornelius Lucas for their O-line. On the losses side, they no longer have Jameis Winston or Dorian Thompson-Robinson or Bailey Zappi, and Deshaun Watson tore his Achilles, and so he's going to be out for the entire season. So all four quarterbacks that played a game for them last season are now gone. They also lost longtime Brown Nick Chubb. They also said goodbye to Deontay Foreman. They lost Elijah Moore. Amari Cooper, they ended up trading away last season. They're also saying goodbye to Jedrick Wills and Jermaine Ifedi. So you can see a real priority for the Browns offseason was throw as many darts as they could at the quarterback position and see what sticks. This is, in my opinion, not a position where you just want to throw a whole bunch of darts and see what lands. I think having stability at the quarterback position is super, super important. And so you're bringing in four guys who don't really have a great track record. I like Kenny Pickett, and we'll discuss him more. But Joe Flacco is getting up there in age. Dylan Gabriel, I don't know if he has the upside to be a long-term starter for you. And then Shedeur Sanders, which is going to be coming in with all of his drama and noise and tension that's going to come on with being Deion Sanders' son. Anytime any of the quarterbacks have a bad drive, throw an interception, there's going to be a lot of talk on Twitter about why Shedeur not playing for a team that has such a bad culture and ended the season so poorly last year, I don't know if bringing all those pieces in is the wisest move for this Browns team. And then running back, I do like how they're moving on from Nick Chubb and Donta Foreman and getting younger at those position. However, I'm not sure if Quinshon Judkins is the guy, and especially with my concerns over their O-line, which we'll get into later. I'm not sure how productive they will actually be. Dylan Sampson, watching his tape, I actually personally am a fan of him. So we'll see if he ends up getting on the field, especially now that Quinshon Judkins has some of his, assault charges. Who knows what his rookie season's going to look like. Harold Fannin is an interesting, small school guy coming out of Bowling Green, was uber productive at Bowling Green, but let's see if he has the athleticism to actually step up to the NFL level. Deontay Johnson, I don't know what happened to him last year. He was really, really good, left Pittsburgh, and now I guess just doesn't care about playing football anymore. Carolina ended up moving on for him, and then when he got to Baltimore, they ended up suspending him because he basically just didn't want to go into a game. So A team that has bad culture, I don't know if they're going to be able to get Deontay Johnson to actually buy in and want to play football again. I just don't trust this culture. I don't trust the player anymore. So I don't know if that was a smart pickup to bring onto your roster. And then Tevin Jenkins and Cornelius Lucas, it's going to be two good depth pieces to bring in to kind of help fill out somewhat of an aging offensive line. Now, when we talk about their defense, so they spent their first round pick on Mason Graham, hopefully to give them some more interior line talent, as well as they brought in Malik Collins to get after the quarterback on the interior offensive line. On the edge, they brought in Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, just going to be a solid edge piece. They spent an early pick on Carson Schweissinger, and then they brought in Nick Needham, Rayshon Jenkins, and DeMonte Casey in the secondary. Defensive wise, Dalvin Tomlinson, Maurice Hurst, Quentin Jefferson, Zadarius Smith, lost some decent pieces on the defensive line, but I don't think anyone that they were super attached to long term. Then JOK, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and Mark Emerson, two solid players for this team. Fortunately, both are going to miss the entire season with long-term injuries. And then they're also saying goodbye to Juan Thornhill and Rodney McLeod, just two base end starters. So now, when we kind of recap their offseason, I think they signed themselves up for another year of the quarterback carousel, which I don't know is what they need to be doing. I still think this team has weak playmakers, and we have an aging offensive line. I'm still worried this offense is not going to be very good. On the bright side, they do still have a lot of continuity on defense with coaching and talent. However, I'm not sure how much of that is going to matter because I think the culture of this team is so poor. But let's go ahead and talk about their offense first. So starting with Kenny Pickett, I think he's going to be probably the best quarterback to come from this room. Former first round pick for the Steelers, got a really, really bad run in Pittsburgh, not really to his own fault. They had really bad coaching at the time, got really unlucky on some interception luck. Then they finally fired, God, I'm forgetting his name right now. Todd Haley, is that, no, is that the old guy? Whoever they fired, I'm blanking on his name. Um, but they fired him. He had a 300-yard passing game and then got injured and then never really got the chance. So now that he's had time to go to Philadelphia, kind of learn, grow a little bit more, I do think he's going to eventually emerge as the best starter for them. I think he's going to have the highest floor. I think when you talk about highest ceiling, it's probably going to be Shadur Sanders. The issue with having Shadur is, as I said, when you're Deion's son, there's going to be a lot more attention. There's going to be a lot more spotlight. And I don't know if this team has the culture to handle all of that. When mistakes start happening, is Shadur going to call people out? Is everyone online going to be talking about it? I just don't think this team needs as large of a spotlight as that Sanders name is going to bring. Dylan Gabriel, I'm not a huge fan of. I would not have wasted a third round pick on him. I don't know if he has upside to be kind of a long term starter for you. Maybe you're hoping he can kind of be an undersized guy who actually carves out a decent career like Russell Wilson. But especially with this organization, I'm not counting on that. And then lastly, Joe Flacco, I think will ultimately end up the day one starter. Had a very bad year at Indianapolis, but I think going to more of kind of a Shanahan kind of inspired wide zone offense, I think will actually help him probably be more successful. But he definitely will not be the quarterback ending the season for them. I'm fairly confident. So now when we talk about kind of their playmakers, ultimately Jerry Jeudy is going to be their best guy. Last year, towards the end of the season, really started to break out, but I don't know if that was a true breakout or kind of just because he was kind of the best guy in kind of a weak room. So do I think he's still in store for another decent season? Yes. I still think he's kind of just a good wide receiver and probably someone I want to be my wide receiver too, as opposed to the best player on my offense. When you talk about kind of some of their other pieces, Deontay Johnson, as I said, I don't trust. Cedric Tillman, I think, is a fine kind of wide receiver four, but he's going to be getting kind of serious playing time for you. And the Jamari Thrash has some fun upside, but I do think overall the floor of this quarterback room, or the floor of this playmaking group, is going to be lower due to the quarterback room and kind of some of the instability and maybe some of the lack of chemistry they're going to be able to develop because, I mean, there's going to be people in and out and multiple people starting for you. I do think David Njoku is definitely the second best piece uh, on this offense. He's just a very solid tight end. Not elite, not anything crazy, but just to set it, forget it. It's someone who you can really use well in your offense. And then Harold Fannin, as I said, someone that I am excited to see how he can perform. But coming from Bowling Green, will he be able to step up to NFL level play? Only time will tell. The running back room, I'm kind of worried about. So Jerome Ford is kind of just very, very low end, basic kind of replacement level starter. So he's going to be just a very okay guy who's occasionally going to break some runs and have some good games. But he's not someone who I want to be a huge threat in my running attack. So you bring in Quinshon Judkins, who hopefully would be able to take over that role. To me, kind of just seems a little slow and plodding, almost kind of like a poor man's maybe James Conner or Joe Mixon. I don't know what his upside is. I don't think he's ever going to be elite. Can he maybe hopefully get to kind of the Joe Mixon, James Conner level? I guess that's kind of what you're hoping for. But who knows how his rookie season is going to go now that there's a potential suspension looming for his domestic violence case down in Florida. And as I said, Dylan Sampson, he's probably the piece I'm most excited about for this running back room. I really like the way he runs. I think he's got good speed. And so I think he could be a guy that will be productive if and when he's out there. So now when we talk about their offensive line, this is just not the offensive line of Brown's past. It's starting to get up there in age, a lot of injuries. These guys are just not performing quite to what we are expecting of them. You know, Joel Badonio and Wyatt Teller are still two decent guards, but they're not the elite tandem that we probably would have said 2 to 3 seasons ago. Jack Conklin has always been a good tackle when he's in there. Just injuries, I think, are stacking up to where, A, I don't trust him to play the full season. And even if he's in there, who knows what we're going to get. You know, if we get a full healthy season, he's going to be solid. That is a lot to bank on. Ethan Posich, kind of just a base end solid starter. Nothing spectacular there. And then DeJuan Jones is kind of the guy you're hoping really kind of takes more steps forward and really kind of develops into the stud and the one to build around on this offensive line. On the bright side, I do think this offensive line has some of the best depth, probably of any unit in the league. Cornelius Lucas is a solid swing tackle. Tevin Jenkins has some interior or outside flexibility, and then Zach Sinner is going to be just a kind of solid backup piece. So even though I think the starter unit is going to be, I think it's going to be good, average. I don't think it's going to be quite like the elite offensive lines that maybe we're used to for some of these Browns teams. So now when we talk about their defense, having Myles Garrett, now that they've locked him up to a long-term deal, I mean, you're always going to have high-end defensive line play just because of that guy. I mean, he is one of the top 3 to 4 players really in the entire league. He is truly an elite player, and having him is going to help all these other guys play a lot better. Outside of him, though, on the edge, you don't really have anyone else you're scared about. Isaiah McGuire is going to be kind of more of an early down run defender, while you're hoping Joe Tryon-Shoyinka maybe can play a little bit better and get after the quarterback a little bit more because he's got Myles Garrett on the other side. Then Alex Wright is going to be kind of just a rotational piece, not really expecting a whole lot from him. On the interior, though, there is a lot more excitement as well as having Myles Garrett's going to help both these guys play better. So Malik Collins is going to do a little bit more getting after the quarterback, and then Mason Graham is going to be probably the better run defender right off rip, but hopefully he can kind of grow and do kind of the Robin to Myles Garrett's Batman. And then Shelby Harris, Mike Hall are kind of just two rotational pieces who are kind of just base level starters. Talking about the linebacking room, it's fine. Jordan Hicks retiring and JOK being out for the season is going to hurt this room. But I think you have 3 okay starters. Carson Schweitzinger probably will play pretty well. He's going to have a really good front in front of him to help out. Devin Bush got a little bit better in his time in Seattle, but still never really grew into that first round pick player that we kind of were hoping that he'd become. And then Jerome Baker at this point is kind of just a solid vet who's good, not great. Now, when we're talking about the secondary is starting to get real weak outside of Denzel Ward, partly because Mark Emerson is out for the season, but just in general, that cornerback room is pretty weak. Denzel Ward is a stud, kind of a fringe top 10 cornerback, but Greg Newsome, just a first round pick that never really developed. And then Cameron Mitchell, Nick Needham, between the two of them, hopefully one of them is going to give you solid slot corner play. The safety room, you do have a Grant Delpit, who is a pretty decent starter. And then between Ronnie Hickman and DeMonte Kazee, hopefully one of them will kind of develop and play as a solid second safety there. And then Rayshon Jenkins, kind of a bigger body safety, kind of like the Grant Delpit replacement. So overall, I do think the offense is going to struggle, um, but I still think it's going to be maybe better than we had last year. And this defense will probably expect uh, what we had last year. It's going to be a top 10 defense as long as Myles Garrett is on the field and healthy and playing. Now I want to welcome you to the Fantasy Control Room, where we're going to talk all things fantasy football. And so first off, we'll start with Jerry Jeudy, the wide receiver one on this team. Currently is being drafted around wide receiver 32, which ultimately I don't think is horrible value, but it's going to be someone that I'm going to pass on. That's a player that I'm going to let someone else kind of get involved in the muck that's going to be the Cleveland Browns this season. Instead, I would target wide receiver 40, 41, or 42. Khalil Shakir, Stephon Diggs, and Jacoby Myers, I think, are all going to be wide receivers, wide receiver ones on their team, but they're also just going to be on better, less messy teams. So if I'm going to get a wide receiver one from any of those teams, let me go get someone else who I think is going to be in a much safer spot. And then Quinshon Judkins is going to be your RB28. I am not touching him at all. Instead, I'd rather target Tony Pollard, who's a really good running back. Another rookie in Cam Scatabo, I think can produce very well as a rookie. Even Najee Harris, I don't think is being talked about how solid of a running back he still is. I do think the Chargers are going to run the ball. So I think Najee Harris is going to be a solid option to draft instead of Quinshon Judkins, who we don't know kind of what's going to happen with his rookie season. So now, kind of just briefly discussing some of their other players. David Njoku, he's tight end 9. I mean, that's good value. There's only a handful of like elite tight ends anyways. So if you want to wait on tight end, draft one a little bit later. David Njoku is a solid guy to pick up. Jerome Ford is RB58. As a late round flyer, I do think he will have decent early season value. Maybe kind of low end flex play, but probably towards the middle of the season, he's going to start getting phased out. Dylan Sampson, I do think could be an interesting dynasty stash. However, in a traditional redraft league, I don't know if he really has any value. Deontay Johnson is going to be your wide receiver 83. Not touching him with a 10-foot pole. Who knows what is going on with that guy anymore? And then Cedric Tillman, wide receiver 63. I don't trust this passing attack enough for him to be super relevant. I don't think any of these quarterbacks are really going to sustain three kind of pass catchers as sustainable, fantasy relevant players. He may have an occasional good week or two. So maybe as a random best ball flyer to have a couple good weeks, he's something interesting. But in a more traditional redraft league, definitely not someone who I want to touch. So now let's go ahead and talk about their schedule. So this is another reason why I'm so low on the Cleveland Browns is this schedule is an absolute gauntlet. For a team that finished last in their division, the second worst team in the league, they could not have gotten much of a worse draw. So first of all, when you're playing the AFC North, you're kind of just screwed. I mean, that's the best division in football outside of maybe the NFC North, another division they have to play. So super, super unlucky draw for them. But I mean, when you look at their first 6 weeks, you have 5 playoff teams in a row, and then the Cincinnati Bengals, who are essentially a playoff team. So you open against Cincinnati, go to Baltimore, at home versus Green Bay, go to Detroit, Minnesota across the seas, and then you have to go to Pittsburgh. Maybe you steal one of those games, but I think you're 0-6. Then you got week 7 versus Miami is, I think, your first winnable game of the season because they're at home. But then you have to go on the road to New England, who is a team I think is going to be really good. So I think as you're entering the bye week, best case scenario, you're 2-7, but I think you're probably honestly 0-8. Then when you come off of the bye week, you have to go to the Jets. Another winnable game, but I think you'd rather have that one at home. You have another game against Baltimore. Maybe you can steal that one. Going on the road to Vegas is not going to be easy with Pete Carroll and what they got going on over there. San Francisco, they were able to muck it up against them last year, so maybe they can have some success, but I doubt it. Tennessee, I don't know if I want to play them later in the season when Cam Ward has figured things out a little bit more. And then same thing going against Chicago when Ben Johnson and company have figured things out more. I don't know if that's who I want to be going against. And then you end with Buffalo, Pittsburgh, and Cincinnati. So their win projection is 4.5 wins. I think their ceiling, absolute high ceiling, is 5-12. I think their floor is 2-15. So I think you're probably somewhere around 3 to 4 wins. So with that being said, I'm taking the under of 4.5 wins for their season. I really don't think this team is going to be able to get to 5 wins. I just don't. Looking at their schedule, I do not see where you're getting those wins. Then when you talk about some of the odds for winning their division, making the playoffs, winning the Super Bowl, I mean, there's just absolutely no value, no chance. This is not a team I'm betting to have any sort of success this season. Jerry Jeudy, though, I will say, over 900.5 receiving yards, I think is still decent value. He's the wide receiver one. Last year he got around 1,200 yards. I think he can get at least to 900 as long as he stays healthy. Another thing I would bet on, though, is the first coach to be fired to be Kevin Stefanski. Because when you see a coach that's already on the hot seat who has to open with that schedule, there is no way he keeps his job to Thanksgiving. And so that is why now I want to introduce you to the Scorch Report. This is where I'm going to be giving my hottest takes of the season. And Kevin Stefanski, there's no doubt he's already on the hot seat. And when we talk about a team that I think has culture issues, I think it's going to be very likely that he's going to lose the locker room. And I am confident, I am calling my shot. He is not making it to Thanksgiving as the head coach of this football team. There's just simply no way with that schedule that the Cleveland Browns organization should keep him around. Frankly, if it was up to me, I would have moved on 2 years ago. Best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. So I think this is probably around that Miami game, probably New England, the bye week. That's probably around the time we're saying goodbye to Kevin Stefanski. Because, boy, that is a rough start to a man trying to save his job. But overall, that's going to be it for today's video. Go ahead, drop down below in the comments. Let me know what you think. Am I too low? Am I being too harsh? Am I just right? Kind of where am I on the spectrum for the Cleveland Browns? If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and like and subscribe as well. For the month of August, I got 30 days to make about 32 videos, so there's going to be a lot of content coming up before the season. So please subscribe, stick around if that's something you're interested in. Thanks.